it's Jessica Joseph from the Global Challenges community, and this is one of many conversations that the Future Law Institute will be spearheading. I'm just here with some really remarkable people. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Margaret, you want to start?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Margaret Rose-Goddard. I am one of the founders of USolve, which hosts the Global Challenges Retreat community, out of which the Future Law Institute has come out, where it's about a group of lawyers coming together, thinking about not only what the law is and the impact of technology on the law, but we actually have quite a normative focus on what the law should be. I know, a bit controversial, but that's where we are. So yeah, hi.
And then there's Anja.
Right. I'm also a lawyer. Together with Margaret, we co-founded the Future Law Institute. And we met a couple of years ago when she invited me to speak about space law. So I dived deep into the weird legal areas like global law, space law, crypto laws. That's my passion. And the more I dig into, the more I find out that there's different legal domains. And I'm very much into just discovering and exploring what those legal domains actually do for us and how we fit in with the legal development. This is what brought us here together.
Great. And then we have Qudus Pulshafi, who is the founder of the Future Lab Legal Initiative. And Qudus, tell us.
Yeah, no worries. So thank you. I'm Qudus. Many versions of my name, and all are welcome. I am down here in Australia. I started Future Lab Legal a few years ago. The journey was a little longer, but essentially it is an institution that bridges together all the pillars of the legal industry. And in bringing them together, all the different areas of law within the industry, both from a practical point of view to the institutions, to the regulators, we seek to find the solutions about how we can pivot into the future of law. So at the moment, there's a huge focus for me on the legal practices, essentially, and new models to run the business of law. But obviously, I'm involved with some conversations with courts and things that are areas of law that are more complex, perhaps, or involve the environment where we practice in. So, you know, I'm very grateful to be part of this conversation, and thank you for having me along. I guess my relationship to Margaret and Anja have just been that we've been in conversation for probably a year now, and always looking at where things are heading and how we can work together to build solutions for it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And I think we should say, I mean, I'm in the UK, Anja's in Slovenia, Qudus is in Australia, and Jessica, you in St. Lucia, yeah?
I'm in St. Lucia. So we have very diverse time zones, but all of us are being impacted by one global phenomenon right now, which is the COVID-19 virus. And that is the context of this conversation, and not just this conversation, but many more conversations that Future Law Institute is going to have about what the future of legal practice is. And I've had some, you know, great exposure to something that it was out of my wheelhouse through Margaret. When we met, you were very much involved in procurement law, and particularly where it involves fighting corruption and eliminating a lot of the injustices that happen as a result of poor public procurement. We met when you were doing these labs, which was to teach companies on how to go about doing procurement that had greater social value, greater oversight. And from there to now, you have been on an amazing journey, and I think all of you have been on an amazing journey. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about where you started as someone coming into law, and where it took you, and why it is you are at where you are at now, where you want to go.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, Jessica, that's a really important question. I think it would be helpful as a trajectory for a lot of people in terms of when you specialize in a particular area, and how, I mean, if you go down the rabbit hole in that specialization, it actually could lead you to see the interconnections and its impact in society. And that was definitely my trajectory with procurement. So I started off in criminal defense, which led me into fraud and anti-corruption work. And out of that, I put a focus on what are the rules and regulations which govern the way governments and public sector organizations spend our money. And I was blown away by, at that time, let's say around 2000, early 2000s, the lack of, you know, overarching regulatory oversight that existed over how governments spend our money, and the kind of archaic way the rules operated. And so I decided to specialize in that area in the early 2000s. And what it did for me, it has really led me to the work that I'm doing now, because the more I learned about procurement policy and law and practice, I started to understand how procurement law and practice was actually just the outcome of economic philosophies that related to how a nation developed. And it was so linked to development outcomes. It led me into understanding its relationship with trade and investment. It led me into understanding our national relationship with global governance. And that led me to understanding how do we work together to make better decisions to address the inequalities between nations and the inequalities in society. They are correlated. I see them as having an economic underpinning, and I see the law as being the last, it's the mechanism that is used to create our current economic and ecological and socio-cultural realities. And because I now see that trajectory, and I now see that relationship between development outcomes and the law, you know, I came together with a few other lawyers, and I actually reached out to Futurist because I researched, I looked around to see globally who were the lawyers that were thinking about the future of the law, and who were thinking about how the world is changing and how we as lawyers need to reimagine our role and the way we practice and embrace new ways of doing and being. And I mean, I was blown away by Futurist and the alignment I saw in his work in Future Lab Legal, and the work that Anja and I had come together to do out of the Future Law Institute and at the Global Challenges community. So that's my trajectory. That's why I'm here. We reached out to Futurist, and we've been having some great conversations about how we can align the work that we're doing to create greater value for others. And hopefully this is one of the first conversations we can have publicly about what we are hoping to do in the future. Yeah.
Okay, so this lends itself to just go right. Kudos. When I looked at your website, I again, it was another like, wow, I had no idea there was someone considering something like this, internal processes, external processes, and how to do everything, just shift everything to a virtual platform. And I know, you know, it probably wasn't where you started as well. How did you get into law? And can you just tell me?
Yeah. So my trajectory, I'm firstly a musician. So I started playing violin when I was 4 years old. And I went all the way to conservatorium as a concert violinist. That was my training originally. But for various reasons that perhaps we don't have the time to explore now, I realized that there was more things that I wanted to sort of involve myself in, and realized that path perhaps wasn't for me, to sacrifice other things, more holistic things. And I share this because I think we'll come back around to it, this idea of a holistic approach to change. So went through university, did the degree in music, came out, went and worked for Hewlett-Packard for a little while, and then started a law degree. As I got to the end of the law degree, I was faced with I was always very curious, but I was faced with some challenges, perhaps given my background, given my family's background, with the idea of being in a advantageous position to get work as a lawyer, as a graduate lawyer. And as I start, and because I was very inquisitive about the process, also a little annoyed, but it is it is we endure. That's the point. So I went and I started to dig a bit and realized that there's a lot of systemic traditions and practices and systems that have sort of thrived for the last 100 or more years in the practice of law, and for the most part those patterns are seen globally. And I started to also see at the same time, as I was learning what this industry was about and its characteristics, I also started to see that there were parts of it that were very toxic and failing, essentially failing but being ignored. And at the same time, I was starting to see that new ideas were popping up and coming through. So that journey of it's almost the serendipity of not being sort of thrust straight out of university as a qualified lawyer into a 9-to-5 job. It's not 9 to 5, right, for lawyers. It's usually
Not at
6 to 10 or something of those sorts. So that was the serendipity of not being thrust directly into that. Part of that was, obviously the market's response. We had a very tight market where I was. It was highly competitive, and I think that's normal for everyone. But for us, it was particularly difficult in our state. And so that, coupled with just, tackling with this idea, being introspective and trying to understand, is it me, is it the system, what part of this is not allowing me to get to that point, I started to realize there are actually some systemic ideas and philosophies that are not allowing that movement forward. So with that began the journey of me going, well, what's happening? And as I figured out what was wrong, I also started to see things that could be right. And the fundamental thing that I realized that sort of forms the basis of Future Lab Legal's philosophy in terms of how it works is that there are 4 pillars in the legal industry. You have the market, which is the legal service providers or the alternative legal service providers. You have the institutions, which is like the universities and people who educate lawyers. You have the regulators, so the people who govern the lawyers. And then you have this new sort of pillar, which is legal tech. This idea of it's a completely niche market. It's technology, but it's applied specifically to the practice of law or areas around law. And that became my 4 pillars of how I sort of split the industry up into. And what I started to see when I recognized that was when people from different areas of these pillars would come together. So whether it was a panel or a conversation or my own one-on-one with a partner, and then a one-on-one with a dean of law, I started to see a lot of people recognizing that there are problems, but really easily sort of wanting to handball them off to another side. I started to realize that everyone's waiting on each other to figure out how to move forward. The universities say, for instance, that they're restricted by regulation, and the markets are saying you need to slow down universities slow down in picking up lawyers because we can't, our system doesn't allow us to have enough room for graduates every year, right? So let's say 300 graduates out of one university in one state, and the top 5 firms can only take 1 or 2 people. So how does that, what happens in that situation? How do these people who want to be lawyers and want to advocate for society and for people, how can they actually go ahead and do this? So that's where I started to realize, well, it's just, sometimes it's just there's no bridging service. There's no opportunity to bring these things together. And just putting them all in a room to talk about something usually doesn't solve the problem. You need to have some more facilitated, consulting or bridging sort of work to actually solve the problems. Those problems will usually be very old, but the solutions will be very new, and everyone speaks from their side. That was the other fundamental thing. So the last point I'll make is that the other fundamental thing was that everyone who spoke about the problems spoke from their side. It was very difficult for them to see what the role of besides blaming or saying that it's someone else's work, it was very hard for people to empathize and actually understand that actually you're all one step away from figuring this out. So that's essentially what the philosophy behind Future Lab Legal is. And then, as you've read, the future framework for legal practice is actually something that, out of that journey, I've then realized that I need to, for the market, I need to build a framework that allows them to realize how they can supplement and replace some of their laborious human leveraged business models into more technology leveraged business models, which will free up lawyers time to solve these difficult problems as well, you know, to move into a future vision and be, you know, the implications span from better business models, you know, so more prosperity for people who actually run law firms, to more access to justice because it can be scaled, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So it's just sort of a little bit about how I got to this point.
And law was your first choice. You didn't as well, or you just like Futurist, you had a creative or scientific background in something else?
Law was my first choice. But people ask me if I would choose it once again, and I'm like, maybe I would choose the computer science before law. But I think, I mean, I could use it very much. But at the same time, law studies give you a very broad understanding of how the political science and how the relations between global stakeholders actually function, and how, for example, we form different rules and how we do the power dynamics within our society. So that broader view, I think, gave me a better understanding of what it is that I can actually do in this world, and how we can do something together.
And you're young, so you could still do the computer science now.
Yes, you can. I think what I'm trying to get at is there are a lot of people who enter the legal profession and they do not think about these things. I'm looking at the journey that all of you have been on. There are people who enter the legal profession, they get a job in a corporate office or within government, and they never think of innovating anything, of becoming an activist about anything. What it is that separates you, I guess I'm getting to your creative question. Your personal creative question, what it is that drives you and made you take this direction. Because people are very content with earning a great salary. They're working in it's usually doctor, lawyer, engineer, or business person. That's considered, you know, the four things that people should aim for academically as if they want success. And most people are just content with that. And the three of you weren't, and you took tremendous risks, I think.
Yeah.
I do want to jump in.
To just go stare different paths. So why? Why?
Can I jump in and answer that? Because I think COVID-19, the crisis or this era that we're in, provides a really great metaphor for change and transformation. And it is when you are faced with challenge and constraints that you have never had to experience before, that's when you see mindsets and approaches and ways of being and doing changing. And what I noted listening to Anja and Kudos about what got them to where they're at, thinking about the future of law and in relation to society and everything, and practice, it was their own challenges as young lawyers coming out with the system not working for them, and then them having to re-strategize, innovate, and all of that. And it's interesting, I'm sitting here and saying, well, why am I, you know, so fascinated and about these areas as well, and working in these areas? And I see the constraint, because I was working in the Caribbean doing, you know, I had, you know, an institute and my legal practice, and was very, very, doing fine, and didn't see a need as well to change, except in substantive areas of the law, but not necessarily in practice. Fell in love with a Brit, moved to England, and the same constraints, maybe not the same constraints, but the whole idea of constraint was put upon me in continuing my legal practice. And so from as early as 2011, 2012, when I moved here in 2011, I had to start, I was forced because of the challenges and the constraints, to think about how can I operate virtually? How can I create a hybrid law firm where I have the staff on the ground in the Caribbean, but I am providing oversight and I am still meeting with clients virtually? And it caused me to launch the first virtual law firm in the Caribbean. Very proud of that. And so for over a decade, I've been conducting my business online because of the constraint of not living where I was qualified to practice. And so I think, in answer to your question, it is constraint. And it is acknowledgement of that constraint and actually being courageous in that constraint, not letting constraints consume or cause you to be fearful, but seeing the opportunity in constraints that I think causes each of us to be on the trajectory that we're on right now.
I know you're a creative person, Margaret, so I think a lot of it had to do with you were already someone who was a problem solver, was an innovator, and you had that entrepreneurial lean as well. So what are the constraints that that legal labs address? Kudos.
Well, I mean, this situation presents the most basic one that we could talk about, which is communication, right? How do you continue to communicate internally with your colleagues and externally with existing and new clients? You know, how do you manage files remotely? How do you, I mean, this is the most obvious first step, but the constraints are actually quite varied. So that's the easiest one to answer because it's the most current one, and is perhaps one of the less complex solutions that you could provide, right? It's more basics of a solution because we have a lot of that infrastructure here in terms of technology that allows people to do what we're doing right now from all parts of the world. There are other ways that people have traditionally managed remote work, which is usually VPN or Citrix, just dialing into the computer at home, or the computer from the computer at home to the computer at work, and continuing business as usual. However, essentially with the exponential shift in technology in the last 10, 15 years, we actually just have way more solutions than just a simple VPN. And simple solutions are fine, but essentially what I'm trying to say is there's the constraints, this being one constraint, this current virus is one constraint, and communication seems to be the bulk issue. But what we'll find is once we resolve that, hopefully it triggers the curiosity of the managing partner to look at and go, well, what else is also available for us? Because if this is possible, then other things must be possible. And essentially, my work is about going forward, perhaps maybe 6 or 7 steps from there, realizing that there is, building a framework, and then working backwards. So this is the most obvious constraint. But other constraints are, for instance, in the business of law is what I like to call this infinite churn. So because we're tied to time-based billing and a partnership structure, several constraints are available to us. So right now, where mid-tier firms, perhaps not globally, but maybe a recurring pattern globally, are feeling pressure with their margins. The top tier is generally okay, and they're growing nicely. The mid-tier, lower, are usually the ones that are challenged in the market. Their constraints are, we can't spend any time away from the actual work that's required to make us revenue, to think about how we could change something, right? So you're really stuck in a tough place. That's another constraint that exists there, which also the framework tries to resolve, and the way that I operate with firms helps to resolve that, because there are also cases, you know, there are lots of firms that use innovation or a chief innovation officer, and that's often one of the most difficult positions to be in, because you're asked to instigate change, and they're paying you to essentially go do your job, and your job is to go back to them and say, hey, can we change this? And you know, design by committee, the partnership structure, all of those things don't allow for agility in decision making and strategy in terms of moving forward. So, I mean, those are just some of the constraints perhaps I'll leave it to. I'll throw it
I
back
like
to
the
you.
word agility. I like, because that's what is needed now. And I know, Anja, you have been for a while now in a very agile field, which was in cryptocurrencies, which was changing, constantly. So I think that probably prepared you for what's happening now with COVID. So I want you to just talk about where you see COVID taking people's day-to-day practice of law. Where is that going?
Yeah, you're right. Definitely, it's a very agile and highly adaptive thing. I mean, people even say like in cryptocurrency field, whatever would normally take 10 years, here it takes a year. So changes are constantly happening very fast, and you can see it all the time. I mean, the markets are crashing, but right now, for example, what's happening right now, the COVID actually influenced the economy of the whole world a lot. Including the economy of the crypto space. But the difference between now and what happened, for example, in 2011, is that before there was no connection to the traditional markets. Right now, you see a lot of links being created, and even though a lot of regulators are now saying, hey, nobody's really going to buy now, nobody's really going to heavily invest because of the low prices, what's really happening is that fiscal policy and monetary policies are actually taking place. So all the regulators that are now saying, okay, you know, the ICOs are no longer happening. People are no longer investing in the cryptocurrencies so heavily that we would need to step in and regulate as well. We shouldn't just rely on the self-regulatory of this space. They should actually be thinking, how is this influencing our own economy as well? What is actually happening behind the doors? So it's a constant change. And I think that over, let's say, 5 or 6 years of just being in this space and being present, a lot has happened. A lot has influenced how people are operating, how people are managing their funds, and not only the funds, but also the organizations. So for example, what happened 2 years ago is that DAOs became present. DAOs meaning decentralized autonomous organizations. And basically what that means is that people are putting proposals online, they're voting online, they're managing their organizations online, building online reputation, building everything, the whole management of the organization in a virtual space. And then you talk to real-time management or the board, and what they do is they manage the whole company maybe via emails. So right now, when you are talking about the real companies, it's at a very, very beginning. But when you are talking about these cryptocurrencies or with the decentralized organizations or people that are representing them, it's far away from what we see in the real life or in the traditional management. And here we are thinking about, okay, how can we lawyers collaborative together, and how can we establish that kind of a virtual collaboration as well? Can we become a decentralized and autonomous organization as well? Can we kind of create these decision-making processes and power dynamics in a virtual world? And there is a couple of platforms that might actually help us achieve that. We just need to explore that. And the biggest obstacle on the road is that all the lawyers have gone through this traditional education system, and they're very, very reverse risk averse.
Yeah.
Not only risk averse, but also, whenever it comes to an innovation, people are like holding back, like, no, I won't be.
And that's why we need
people spent a lot of money on that education. We have to remember that.
Absolutely,
yeah. But we need new forms of education.
Yes.
And I think that was the genesis and what came out that caused us, Anja and I and others, to come together to form the Future Law Institute and the Future Law Collaborative as a virtual collaboration of lawyers who want to work together on Agenda 2030 and the more normative aspects of the law, as in substantive laws that need to be reformed in order for us to have better outcomes. But yeah, we need new ways of educating. We call it in Future Law Institute the next generation of legal education, new ways of educating lawyers in emergent forms of law and practice. And not only new ways of educating them, but also substantively new areas of the law to be taught so that lawyers can be equipped right, to deal with the changing world.
What are some of these emergent? What are some of these emergent forms of legal practices? Not just in terms of COVID, but in general. What are they?
Things like conscious. Right, go ahead. Sorry.
Kudos put it in his newsletter. He has this one sentence. You used to call me on the cell phone. I love this. The comparison with Drake, I mean, it's incredible. It's exactly what's happening right now. I mean, we used to have these traditional communication tools, and right now we're forced into finding, you know, Zoom calls, or let's have some virtual collaboration. What are the tools? And now you have these plenty of tools, let's say Asana and Trello and Zoom call and Hangouts and stuff like that, but we don't really know how to use them properly to become effective, how to create our optimum.
The challenge that it's fantastic. Thank you for the shout out on that, on the hotline. The issue is exactly that, and I know that Margaret, I think, probably saw this in my work, which is why she approached, because she says very similar things as well. It's about we're entering an era where not only has technology matured outside of the legal industry, but within the legal industry, legal tech has also matured as a market, as an ecosystem, and it continues to mature. More and more money it continues to be poured into it. That's one way to, you know, to perhaps measure the growth of a market. More and more people are founding new things, and just last year, we started to see some of the big 4 tech companies dabble in law in one way or another, or in the legal field. So through their technology. So where we usually needed custom bespoke technology for very specific and niche tasks within the practice of law, originally, we're now faced with a variety, a smorgasbord of technologies that service different areas of what was typically done within the business of law. So communications being one, which we've just explored. But the thing that Margaret and I think, obviously share is this idea of, and Anja, obviously, but I remember Margaret coining this phrase of sort of meta-legal thinking. But so in the practice and business of law, it's now an essential skill for current lawyers and emerging lawyers to understand system thinking and design. Because what you'll be doing from now on is not building these things from scratch, not having to become a software engineer and go and code it from scratch. It's about how do you put these things together in a coherent way. We have technology that does legal analysis and AI applications or machine learning applications to contracts. We have contract management software. We have many, and they all work now on a rotation or a circular economy. So they work on an operational expenditure, not a capital expenditure. You don't spend large sums of money investing in these technologies. You spend a subscription fee. So this entire business model is changing. And it's just this skill that needs to be built now. So existing managing partners either need to trust people like myself, like Margaret or Anja, to educate. And that comes back to the agile education as well. The universities will not pick this up fast enough. They just won't. It's been historically behind the times. And as was mentioned, the law profession itself, the fraternity itself, its foundation is based on the rule of law, which is the rule of precedent, which means looking back, not looking forward, looking at past decisions to make future decisions for that stability. So there was a reason for it. There's a reason for it, right? The stability of society and civil society. But we're in an interesting time where circumstances in the market have changed so rapidly that perhaps that way of thinking about things will not suffice. And those who continue down that path will be faced with many challenges. So essentially, it's just system thinking and system architecture and design, which becomes now an essential tool. We need to both have people like ourselves ready to consult with firms and help build out the capacity. I know that's something I focus on, but we also at the same time need to start to educate emerging lawyers, young lawyers who can just see, who for them, these technologies are second nature. The phone is a second, as it stands, the way it is now. You know, there was a time when my dad would pull the antenna up when he answered the phone call, right? Running on an AM, it wasn't digital, it wasn't FM, radio. So you know, we just need to help to equip them, and we can't probably wait for a ubiquitous sort of response from the educational complex, essentially, university complex.
Yeah, I know all three of you have been involved in education. I know Margaret lectures law students. I know Anja does a lot of training programs and seminars educating people, and of course, kudos you. That's what you're all about.
Yeah, the framework, the author. I think there's been more experience from Margaret and Anja in terms of delivery. The framework is very new, but that's my first foray into educating.
Education.
Yes. Before we go on, though, I do want to answer your question about the emergent areas of law and practice, because yes, technology, has caused a lot of those forms, and yes, will transform the way we're doing law and practice, and that is an area. That's one area. Absolutely, system thinking and system architecture, as Kudos has identified, is another area, and it is actually the primary area that Future Law Institute is looking at. We are, actively involved in legal system thinking approaches, and complexity-informed legal system change is one of our primary master classes that we are launching later on this year at the Future Law Virtual Summit. And that's also critical, or probably primary. But I also want to mention the soft aspects of emergent law and practice that don't get enough recognition. And there are movements like conscious contracting. And we have some of the top experts that we work with, J. Kim Wright, Rhiannon Thomas, Patrick Andrews, who are talking about, a more values-based approach to contracting and to relationships. Jim K. Wright also spearheads a movement, an area of law called integrative law, which is looking at taking a more holistic approach in all areas of the law, family law, criminal justice, so more rehabilitative justice approaches, and all of that. And so there's so much transformation going on. It's not just tech and systems thinking, which I think are the sexiest areas for a lot of young lawyers and all of that. But there's also a revolution of heart happening in the legal profession. And I remember being heavily educated into compartmentalized thinking. And I think it's a skill set as lawyers that we don't consciously set out to develop it, but we have it by the time we get our law degree, looking at things in a very, I would say, reductionist, linear way, because you have to do that to dissect things. What are the elements of an offense? And, what is the evidence for that particular element? And how do we prove A, B, C, and D? As Curtis also said, what is the precedent? But also, I remember as a criminal defense attorney, people always asking me, how can you represent a rapist? How could you represent a murderer, a robber, and all these drug lords and all of that? And I was heavily educated to have the off-the-bat response. Every single person deserves a defense, and they do. So I'm not saying that it was wrong, but I'm saying the kind of human being that can stand in a court and represent a rapist. Someone, I remember representing someone that it was an uncle who raped his 9-year-old niece, okay? And everyone was looking at me like, scum of the earth, who are you? How could you represent this person? It was a legal aid case. But at the end of the day, yes, I had personal revulsion to what it was about and what I was being asked to do, but I had been educated to be compartmentalized in terms of the work that I was doing in the court, and to approach it objectively, as in the state needed to prove its case against this person, and I was standing in between as one of the arms of justice. The point I'm trying to make is that that kind of human being, it's going to take a lot for that kind of legal practitioner to integrate more holistic approaches in other areas of the law and in how they treat and understand the law. And I think that whilst there's benefit to that, and I understand the benefit to that, I think we're moving into a world where everything is not so black and white, and we as human beings are recognizing that, and that we have to embrace the complexity of the human experience. And so, yeah, I mean,
that is good, because here is one concern that some people may have. As we start to shift more and more towards virtual and digital and AI, that human complexity and all of that, are we going to lose that? Are we? The law is already very dispassionate, so now we're not even dealing face to face as often. How do we maintain whatever human complexity and human element is left in law as we start going further and further away from that interpersonal relationship in person, where these, you know,
that's a big question. That's a huge question, and I'm not going to even pretend to have any or all of the answers to that. And in fact, that AI, but yeah, sure. Well, you jump in, because that's just one point. That AI, particularly in the context of criminal justice, is very, very problematic. Based on what is the data that has been sourced to make these predictive analyses about people. How inclusive is that data? So we have a lot of challenges there. That actually is one of the themes and topics that we're addressing at the Future Law Regional Summit later this year. But yeah, Kudos, you take that question if you think you have an answer to that, because that's huge. That is, yeah.
Look, I won't touch on the AI one, which you just briefly, you know, mentioned some of the critical points, the salient points there about biases within algorithmic decision making, and this fascinating idea, which is an extension of that, which is what would happen if AI was applied to an entire body of case law and was then allowed to make decisions based on that. Would we have a more efficient, based on the rule of precedent? Would the rule of precedent essentially survive when an AI is enabled to make decisions based on the history of decisions that have been made? So, you know, giving a machine what would normally be the judge's job, who is also a human, and there's all of that element to it, that holistic element.
The prone to the human error.
Yeah, prone to human error, but also have the I guess the emotional capacity for justice, as is understood by us, not understood by a machine.
By machines.
Right?
So the discretion of the judge as well. You know, there's some
exactly. That's the human nature of it, right? Yeah. So I mean, look, we can go into scenarios about how that could move from step where we are now to some stuff that's happened in America that's been trialed to what would the next step be. But in terms of answering this human aspect in the change of all of these applications, I always say that this change is a renaissance of human to human, not a removal. Because right now, even in the business of law, it's not the majority that actually pride themselves and enjoy the human aspect of dealing with clients. And it's not for their own fault in that sense. It's because the business model doesn't allow them the time. So because human to human takes time, you know, this relationship, this wonderful relationship that sort of bloomed early last year with Margaret and Anja, with myself, that's taken time. That takes time. And if none of us have the time, then it's not going to happen. So far from having, and we're on, you know, in comfortable equal footing and equal terms and very amicable. What happens, for instance, in your criminal defense work when you don't know the next person that walks through the door and now you need to defend a rape charge, for instance. So time is what lawyers are robbed of at the moment because of a essentially antiquated business model, right? You've pinned your value against the time that you put on a case. And because you need to do more and more and more of that, you need to spread your time thinner and thinner. What technology allows is it allows you to scale your time, essentially. If done right, you can scale your time and allow yourself more time once again. And people always, you know, there's always this this false dichotomy that people put in place, like, oh, well, if we, you know, the robots taking over the job. I mean, that's the cliche term. And I always say, no, well, what do you think happens when you can replace some of the work that you've given to a junior? And believe you me, from personal experience, the junior is not enjoying themselves in any way, shape, or form. You know, it's not fun to run files to court and order coffees and, you know, do this laborious legal research, although there is benefits to learning the ropes through the legal research. So not to downplay it, but taking those menial, low chargeable tasks away and automating them gives the junior time to actually focus on what it actually means to be a legal analyst and to problem solve, and to also importantly build relationships with the clients. And so not only do you have more time, but everyone underneath your structure or hierarchy, whatever you've built, now has more time. And so my point always becomes, well, when you have more time, what's going to happen? Yes, you'll scale a little more because you'll be able to do it more efficiently, but some of that time should be apportioned to the client-centric approach to dealing with the law. If that's because that's going to be a pivotal point to you actually winning in the market. People want to be heard. People want human interaction. So any technology you do apply needs to be done strategically in a way that allows you to actually go back and spend more quality time with the client, build your services around the conveniences for the client. And some clients, you know, sometimes that's the human touch. It can be as, you know, physical, but it can also be just that time that you allow yourself to be empathetic to the person you're sitting across the room for, and not checking your watch every 6 minutes and realizing that someone's going to whip you because you spent too many units on this case. So it's just a little point on that question.
Okay, so two things. The actual process of firms running themselves and their business model and so forth in terms of COVID, and two, the legal issues that are coming up as a result of global pandemics. From everything from, what do you see as the most pressing things as far as that is concerned? So it's open to anyone to answer.
Who wants
Anja.
to jump in first? Let Anja.
Go, Anja.
Anja.
I can talk about 2 or 3.
Because Kudas and I are too talkative.
Yes.
It's a very much a pleasure to kind of listen to you. I was laughing all the time because I'm dealing with the robots and I'm seeing it from a bit of a different perspective, that's all. I see it as we lawyers will have to transition into becoming more creative and learn the code, because whatever is going to happen with the AI and the robotics is going to show us our human picture, our real human picture. So the data that we're going to scrape, the data that we're going to use for whatever decision is going to be made by the robot or the AI is going to show us the real picture. These are the data that we operate with, but it's going to be up to us whether we want to, you know, change the data, fix the bug, or provide a new feature to use more data, to collect more data, and to kind of do a better decision-making process with the technology at hand. But yeah, okay.
So you think lawyers really should learn how to code? Because, you know, there was this big argument, do we need to?
I think code is pretty much a new language based on the mathematics. And if we learn the mathematics and the basis for that, then, and we're now learning Chinese, English, different languages, that's yet another language that we will need to obtain. I mean, we also learned to communicate through Microsoft operating system, right? We learned new operating systems. The only difference is that these operating systems are actually having a much better user experience, while the code still looks very raw. But that's about to change. And if we actually know and learn how to speak to developers, they're going to take that into account and say, okay, let's change the code so that the lawyers are going to, you know how to use it, and it's going to become much more easier. So it's going to be like, oh, this button does that, this button does that. And it's not going to be just, I have to type this in so that it shows me something. So yeah, I think that transition is going to take place, and it's inevitable. But it's also going to be bringing about two different fields. Probably there's going to be a separation towards having a very traditional trajectory of laws or lawyers, and then having more
legal technologists,
contemporary legal technologies and innovation, and it will have to work hand in hand. I mean, you can see that in the economics already, right? We had one, it was like the crypto market and all the crypto exchanges and all the new financial technologies that had nothing or very little to do with the traditional economies on the other side. But it took it 6 years to actually become and merge together. And today you see traditional exchanges adopting the cryptocurrencies, offering new financial instruments. And this is pretty much what happens in all of different fields. It's not just economics, it's also the legal fields as well. So I think that there's going to be a merger. And learning how to code, it's pretty much just like learning any other language. So might be even easier. But
if you had to design a law degree now, Anja, so it would include coding, what else?
Oh, definitely there would be complexity designs and meet the legal, everything that has to do with meta legal. A lot more of the ecological topics. We hardly have any of them. And I would do the emphasis on the international and global laws, because it's another layer that is very heavily integrated with the local ones, but just operating within one jurisdiction, it doesn't really provide you with a lot of aspects. And even now, I mean, I work in one jurisdiction, but I use templates and I use contracts that are basically from England or US and stuff like that. So as soon as we have the startups, as soon as we have our clients that are operating on a global level, we need to know different jurisdictions. And now what's happening is that we try to integrate in different networks of lawyers, so that we have friends all over different jurisdictions, and then ask them, hey, can you help me within your jurisdiction with that legal problem? But, you know, it might as well be that we all have different parts of knowledge and kind of work together because we know how, or at least we have the know-how. So we're running a think tank, and the objective of the think tank is to kind of merge or create a dialogue with the regulators on one side, the block, basically. But what's happening this year is that we are having the elections for the management board and the president. The problem being, we can't come together because there's going to be a lot of members of the think tank coming together for the elections, and now we're prohibited. And we cannot be gathering in a number more than 5, right? So what we were thinking about, and 2 years ago we've already done that, we ran the elections virtually. And now we're doing it again, and I can see that there's a lot of different people from different communities, not only ours, thinking about how the elections might actually happen online. There's a couple of issues, and they all have to do something with the law. So for example, here, whether the statute of our association allows virtual election was the first question. The second question was, do we need the anonymity for the election? And those are just a couple of these types of questions. Yesterday we had a conversation with some people from Trinidad, for example. They were all asking whether management boards can now take decisions virtually as well. And it's all about whether the company statutes allow you to kind of have the assemblies online and to take those decisions online. And right now I can see that a role of a lawyer is to go through the statutes, go through the rules and all these associations, constitutions or whatever a company or an association has, and see whether those possibilities are already allowed, and then check whether the laws allow that. And if they don't, maybe now it's time to, you know, open the dialogue with a regulator, see what needs to be changed, and kind of do something around that, trigger the dialogue between different ministries, open up a lot of laws, suggest whether the opinions need to be made so that we kind of have another type of a, how do you call it? The explanation of the law? Or do we really need to implement new laws, new changes for the laws? So those are a couple of things.
Just on that point, because that's an important consideration. Companies in company law do have the power to create their own bylaws. They're relating to how they meet their process of making decisions. And, you know, for over a decade, for all companies that have been incorporating in Trinidad and Tobago and locally, we would go into the bylaws and adjust those bylaws to allow for virtual decision making, virtual meetings and all of that. And so that's a really good point Anja has pulled out, that if there's one thing people can take away, check your company bylaws, check your process, your constitution. If you're an NGO and you're unincorporated, check your NGO constitution and see what are the express terms with respect to how you meet and processes of decision making, and just agree an amendment and amend those rules urgently, because in this era of COVID, we're certainly not going to be able to have the kinds of gatherings and meetings that would not be responsible to that we've been accustomed to having. Yeah.
And that as well triggers our second challenge or a second experience that we had. So for example, LegalX, right? And a lot of these different summits that were now canceled or are being postponed are kind of triggering the need to check all the clauses related to the force majeure. So what happens in the case that nature kind of interferes, or what happens when somebody loses control over the circumstances and is pushed into cancellation of the event? And it's not only the events, it's of course all the business as usual. And that leads me to the third example actually, which is probably the most imminent one. And that is what happens with the workers. Right now, we are all being forced to work from home, but not a lot of people are having that possibility to kind of work from home. I'm working from home for the last 3 years, but a lot of people need their computers or need their assets in front of them, or they're bound to the office or wherever they're actually working, and a lot of employers are just letting them go. We even had it on the news saying, hey, if you are forced to write or to sign a contract to just be let go from the company, you should really reconsider and you shouldn't be signing anything now. And that's a huge issue. I mean, employment contracts being just forced to cease, that's, yeah. That's
we need to talk about the finance, because that was the question that was going to come up. The financial output that is going to be required to go virtual, and whether or not this is going to be prohibitive for a lot of people based on probably where they are in the world. I mean, and their internet.
Curtis is on top of that. Curtis is on top of that.
Take it.
In the past, maybe.
The cost is genuinely shifting an entirely traditional partnership model. For instance, an example of law or the legal industry into a digital one is fractional. It's a fraction of the cost. That, and you know, there are firms, any managing partners or any partners who've been around at a firm long enough will be easily able to recollect their last IT attempt in the old way, which is, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, 6 to 12 month timeline just to tinker with something, essentially, not to create something new. So like when you compare that cost that you were willing to do, and perhaps it worked for you or it didn't work for you 5 years ago, now it's a fraction of that cost, and it's definitely a fraction of that cost upfront. So in terms of it being a circular payment versus, or an operational expense versus a capital expenditure, that's the fundamental shift there. In terms of some of the challenges that COVID presents, I think Anja covered some really good ones. Force majeure is a huge one that's going on right now. But one of the things that I feel like on a wider scope, not just for the legal industry, but perhaps for the world at large, a lot of industries and companies are being shown whether they are to be hanging around for the next 50 years to 100 years. Right, paying other people is one thing, but just their entire business model. What are we here to really do? From a few aspects. From the human aspect, it's, you know, when everything was fine, I clock in and I clock out, and we're manufacturing a piece of sticky tape. I don't know, you know, and there's some utility to that, right? But then when from a human aspect, when things fall apart, we really ask ourselves, what are we doing here? The company owners, not the workers. The workers are getting laid off, but the company owners will go, right, how do we contingency plan for the next time this happens? And some of that is bylaws going virtual, but for other industries, it may be automating. Again, some of the manual labor work that used to exist. So I foresee that COVID is fantastic in the sense, or it's unfortunate, but it's fantastic in the sense that it's really forced the hand of almost every industry to really take a step back and go, okay, if something like this can happen and no one can really control it and manage it, and our entire business model starts to fall apart as a result, we really need to rethink and reimagine how we can be sustainable. And sustainable now has more than one meaning, and I know that Margaret and Anja probably have thrown that word around a lot in other ways, particularly pitched against Agenda 2030. But really, that's the, I don't see a difference. It's a different flavor to the same word of like, how do we continue this? We need to be more aware of the world, of our environment, of our ecologies. We need to be more aware of humans, because company owners are also now faced with the reality they have to let people go, and people have families to feed and all these things. So it's almost like, in a more philosophical sense, it's almost like it's testing whether what you set out to do was a construct that was built on sand, essentially, because I think a lot of things, if it was built the right way from the beginning and tracked well, you will see that those things will naturally thrive. Or let's say things that people recognize and pivoted before calamity occurs are now in a position to thrive and survive, So just some thoughts there in terms of COVID and what's happening.
Yeah, that's certainly how we feel in Future Law and in the Global Challenges community. That it seems like we were working at, Jessica told, for this very moment in history.
It does feel like a lot of people who were innovating for this moment. And didn't realize it.
Yeah, in our community, yeah.
How can a company, not just a legal company, but...
Before we move on, I would like to answer about COVID.
Okay, yes.
Oh my God, because to me, this is why I think this conversation is so important. It's not just about, kudos, Anja and I, and many other lawyers have been thinking about the future of legal practice for several years and advocating for new forms of education around technology, around processes in firms and management and all of that. We've been there. But more than that, there's so much that this COVID-19 is this period is presenting for us. And I think I want to jump off on what Curtis was talking about, the philosophical aspects as well. And for me, I am fascinated by how quickly the occurrence of COVID-19 has spawned and has caused such radical change and transformation in our society. So many lawyers and lawyers within our community who would have been working on ecocide and ecological issues are seeing things that they were advocating for and asking for happening overnight. Those of us who were talking about, and in particular in my area, how governments spend money, and that value should not just be based on economics, but on what is the social and environmental impact. We now see decision makers making decisions that are about social impact and not looking, oh my God, how much is this going to cost us, right? We see some governments saying employers need to let their employees stay home, and if you can't do it, we are going to step in and we are going to make direct contributions to these people. We're seeing so many innovative decisions being taken by leaders right now. I was in shock 2 days ago listening to the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who, it's not about being political, but who's always been on the side of, I would say, classical neoliberal economic thinking in terms of his political leanings. And I was in shock. I heard this man say 2 days ago at a daily briefing on Corona that in the 2008 crisis, we bailed out the banks. In this crisis, we will not. We will be taking the money and bailing out the people on the ground who are suffering the most. You know, so when you see that kind of transformation occurring, you know that there is a lot of suffering and a lot of hardship that people are undergoing right now, and we as a global collective will undergo as a result of this COVID-19. But I mean, those of us who have been looking at this thing from a systems perspective will see that there are a lot of opportunities here for the reset that many have been clamoring for since Occupy Wall Street, in our economic systems, in our healthcare systems. You know, whereas Bernie Sanders' approach to Medicare for all and free health care and Medicare as a right in the US has been perceived as such a crazy idea, now it makes economic sense and ecological sense to protect others, to protect yourself, and you can't rely on their financial pocket and all of that. So at a philosophical level, I feel we have to look at it, as Kudus was saying, you know, systems view, systems architecture, what's happening in the world. And from a more granular and tactical perspective, I can't speak for all areas of law. And I think we spent most of our conversation talking about how we can engage with technology to create deeper connections within the management of law firms and all of that. But I can't speak to all areas of law, but in terms of my particular area, which is public procurement, public sector contracting, I think it's a very, very important time. Because there's some risks associated here and there's some opportunities. I think the issue about force majeure is very important. That's something all contracts right now should be audited for their force majeure clauses so that parties can understand what their responsibilities are and what they will be held to. And that's going to be quite a fact-specific exercise because there are different ways in which force majeure clauses can be drafted. And the courts have been very reluctant to use discretion in force majeure clauses. They look to the specific wording, are pandemics and epidemics included? You know, and if not, and it's act of God only, then there's going to be all sort of arguments about whether a pandemic is an act of God. And so I think certainly there's going to be a lot of work for lawyers, unraveling and supporting all of these contractual lack of performance that is happening and is going to even explode. So that's one major thing. The second, okay, you wanted to jump in, Curtis, but I do.
Beyond that, yeah. As you were talking, I realized that it is also an opportunity. So in terms of crisis management response, that's definitely a huge point. It's also a huge point as an opportunity as certain structures fall apart, that we build new ones in their stead. Yeah. And that doesn't happen in a linear fashion, it happens at the same time. So the same force majeure clause might be, so exclusive announcement, the force majeure clause might also be the first clause that is agreed upon and decided in a universal way through this. It's an opportunity for that to happen, essentially. Yeah. It's like, how do we leverage not only the technologies, but also recognizing that if something like this happens in a worldwide manner, maybe there should just be one uniform template. There should be one uniform clause that automatically unifies all jurisdictions, clarifies the necessary processes that are required in activating that clause and seeing it through. Flexible for each jurisdiction, but it being a universal clause that gets picked up. That's an opportunity I see.
Absolutely.
Wait. Okay.
That is so excellent.
So yeah, I do want us to speak a bit more about the force majeure clauses, because what I see right now is the opposite of what they stand for usually. Usually what happens is that in the act of God, or if there is some natural event occurring, the party is actually being released of their responsibility. So they don't really need to cover the damages. But what I'm seeing in reality right now is that, for example, airline companies are offering me free flights. They're offering me the remedies that would usually not really be allowed to, or I wouldn't really be able to get those remedies. I wouldn't really be able to get all these options because the force majeure occurred. And what you're saying, Kudos, I would very much like to understand that, but I think that when such a huge global event occurs, everybody sticks together, everybody wants to show that they are, they feel solidarity between people. They need to step together, they need to help each other out, and this is what happens. But that actually goes contra the whole point of having the force majeure in the first place. These clauses are usually being put in the contracts because we want to protect parties from being responsible for the events they had no control over. And right now they're actually taking the blame, or they're
taking more responsibility. You're seeing that
taking more responsibility,
which is so
so I don't think what we're saying is at odds with each other.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
It's an
opportunity.
I'm really speaking from a, and this is something that we've discussed with the Future Law Institute, which is, what does a global jurisdiction look like, or a pseudo jurisdiction that's global in nature and agile and responsive and distributed, right? So all I'm identifying, I just realized as we talked about it, is that because it's a global issue and because force majeure is triggered in so many ways, in different ways, of course, we are returning to the human nature of people taking responsibility and just helping each other out regardless of the legal terms. But at the same time, what we learn from this can also be an opportunity to be pioneers in building a clause, force majeure clause, that may continue to need to be involved for legal purposes, but now it's unified across all jurisdictions. And that's something that's, that would be a conversation that if I had it 6 months ago, people would laugh at me. They say, oh, when is that going to happen? But what I'm saying is right now, now people would stop to listen. Exactly what Margaret was saying about, people stopping to, people have been working on certain things. You've been working on this, the sustainability for such a long time, public procurement and governments being accountable from their entire supply chain of how they use the people's money. This is where that COVID has created, blown it out the water for a lot of these opportunistic moments to create cohesion on a global scale, rather like a global village, versus just as soon as we start talking about different jurisdictions, it's like, oh, it's complicated. And as lawyers here, we know it's complicated, but we also know if people are willing, we can create a way to make it work.
And
you got go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, because I think, you see, Kudos identifies an incredible use case for the Future Law Collaborative that we have been developing and working on since last year. And it's what you said, that, you're doing these things, and but we found that every lawyer we spoke to was incredibly interested and saw the benefit. Not everyone, not every lawyer, to be fair.
Just to clarify, it's not that they don't see it. It's because they're pinned to the churn that I was talking about, the infinite churn. It doesn't allow them resources or time to even explore it, right?
Absolutely.
But go on, sorry.
So I really love the idea that you have put out here, Kudos, about, how do we come together at a global level and rethink what a clause that could address something like pandemic would be. And so it's an incredible use case for the Future Law Collaborative.
Right.
And
not just its technicalities, right? So how do we write the law? What language or type of taxonomy do we use? But also what systems, like the DAO, what systems can you have that it is triggered automatically? So let's say if I could go into it, I don't know if it's safe to do it on a recording because we might want to keep this.
We're in a time of solidarity.
No brainstorming potential.
So let me throw it out there. So the other elements I'm thinking of is, imagine if this clause, in order for it to work in multiple jurisdictions, in same way in international law, you have signatories. So people who sign to it, they could sign to a depository of
digital
clauses.
environment.
They can sign, they can be assignees to the depository of clauses that are not just written in a way that's responsive and agile to any jurisdiction that signs onto it, like you can replace Australia with America. You can replace jurisdiction with another word depending on how things work. But that it is serviced by an automated, trackable, whether it's blockchain or not, system. So that when it actually, you know, so let's say instead of, and that could be also decided by parties remotely. So the signatories don't have to have a G20 summit to decide to activate this clause. They could all press the button from home and go, you know, and the rule can be maybe out of 50 signatories, if 40 sign or if 35 sign across the world, then this clause is automatically activated across any signees who do this. I mean, that's automated.
And that's contract law. And under every jurisdiction's contracting environment, and I don't know much about the Middle East and the Arabic systems, but I know in common law and civil systems, we have a freedom to contract. And so the more lawyers engaged in this system and agreeing to this system, we could put it into those. Wow, you're such, I love chatting with you, Chris, because we get all these ideas.
Do you all foresee any issues happening with a pushback against this globalization thing? the two of y'all are vibing.
No,
no, this is good. This is good, and ideas are going to come out of this, and people who want to continue to be a part of this dialogue and engagement with everyone. It's good. It's great.
I did also just want to finish what I was saying about COVID and its impact on contracting.
Sure.
My area, sorry. Yeah, so force majeure, we dealt with that in such an amazing way. Coming up with an amazing solution that we could start with, and that's incredible. But also from the context of procurement, I mean, I think an issue that's going to arise, and it may have arisen for some governments already, is emergency procurement. That is when things are so overwhelming, you cannot go with your standard offers, you cannot go with what you've had in place, or your supply chain has been disrupted for some reason, and you need to immediately and quickly procure supplies, emergency supplies for certain things for your citizens. And you see governments taking on more and more responsibility in this health crisis. And so what's going to happen in an emergency procurement situation, governments are allowed not to follow the standard rules of procurement, so that they can move more quickly, to get what they need. There is a risk there. There is a risk there for a lack of accountability and corruption and all of that. And so here again is an opportunity for governments to be far more transparent, leveraging technology to be more transparent and get immediate offers in a transparent way in a public digital space. So, I mean, that's an ongoing issue that governments and public agencies will have to start to look at. And even in the private sector, they're going to have to start looking at doing those kinds of things. And so a lot of us have been clamoring for more e-procurement for a while. Again, this crisis is going to force us to take on e-procurement. And then finally, in the context of procurement, you will see more of an emphasis on how do we measure the social value and the ecological value of what we are buying. You will also see, which we have been clamoring for from before, you will also see more of a focus on local procurement, development of the local economies, because we can't depend so much on the air and the shipping, and how do we build resilience locally. So, I mean, it's going to transform, but in my perspective, from public contracting perspective, this is a bomb that has been dropped in the middle for governments, and it's going to require lawyers to really demonstrate some leadership in those contracts and in those contracting arrangements, and to really be equipped to advise governments how to go forward in this uncertain environment. And then, of course, from a process standpoint, I'm outside of public contracting now. From a process standpoint, we can't, right now, at least for the next 6 to 12 months, public trials, where the public is allowed to come and you have juries and all of that, we may have to start thinking about some of the things Richard Susskind has been writing about for some years, and he just published a book called Online Courts in 2019. It may be that governments will have to be investing in that infrastructure rapidly.
Yes.
And we've been clamoring for that for a while as well. So COVID is going to have...
I'm actually talking to people in the UK right now about how they're responding, how the court system is actually responding, and trying to bridge them to other founders that I know who've built online dispute resolution software to deploy rapidly, be able to rapidly deploy in maybe a smaller county and test it, and then, you know, on lower risk cases, magistrate level, and then all the way up to Supreme, depending on how long this disaster, you know, persists.
Those are two different solutions. I mean, those are two different solutions, both very much necessary. One is how you create a publicity of all the court procedures that are being held. So some people are already live streaming them and putting them on the TV so that everybody can actually participate publicly. But the other one is basically what you were talking about, Kudus, and that is the online dispute mechanisms. Those are a bit more complicated, perhaps, because you really need to achieve how court is going to be put online. So you're pretty much creating a digital twin for the court. It's no longer just about the publicity. It's no longer just about us participating at the court processes, but it's about how court orders and how judges are creating these decisions. Those are two heavy, those are two solutions that we definitely need to explore. Maybe in this time and era, it's a bit of a push. And also, Margaret, what you were talking about, the public procurement, you should hear about our case that just happened. We made we made an order for 3 million of masks, and they were ordered and should be transported from Italy, and the guy that was driving the truck just went missing.
Oh my God.
But the huge problem here was about who relied on whose services, so that the public procurement actually was effective. I mean, here it wasn't, obviously, although the person from the ministry was supposedly doing the contract and this deal with somebody that has been a trusted party for over 20 years, and still those 3 million of masks went missing.
Wow.
Right?
Anja, I was about to go into something similar, and I was going to raise one other thing, which was the pushback we're seeing a lot against globalization and against that type of global governance and global oversight. And all three of you have emphasized this. So that was one challenge I was going to raise, but now Anja has raised the security issue, and I was going to raise security issues with regard to all of these virtual platforms and you know.
Oh, that dives deep. That goes even deeper. I mean, you can see a lot of people migrating onto the online platform. I even made a post about that and spoke with my mom. She now wants to be present on Facebook, right?
Exactly.
And it's insane. I mean, I wrote like we're urged to wash our hands in real life, but basically going onto the digital platforms, we need to make sure that we're not leaving our digital footprints all over the whole place, right?
Data rights.
Yeah, not only data rights, it's really how you present yourself in a digital world. What do you say about yourself? How open you are to people, whether you're
how susceptible you're making yourself to social engineering.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that this actually gives a lot of space to new Cambridge Analytica, to new digital dictatorship in a way. Now Facebook is actually taking the right to delete all of our posts, and we've seen that with a lot of friends. We've been speaking about how they are deleting these posts about COVID-19 because their algorithms right now are not capable of splitting or making a difference between something that is considered a spam, something that is going to misinform the public, and the posts and articles that actually have added value and are very well researched and are providing us with really good sources. They're deleting the whole thing. So we are now talking or contemplating about migrating to some more liberal platforms that are not really presenting these types of policies secretly or imposing these types of algorithms on our lives. But then again, we should actually all be thinking about, okay, is this post that I want to make a legit post? Does it have a reliable source? Am I going to be informing the public or misinforming the public? And those are the questions that every single person that is being engaged online should actually go through, instead of just, oh, I see this post and yeah, sure, it's worth sharing with everybody because it's a bit funny and, you know, it presents new information about COVID, but I haven't really checked, but here it is, and I'm gonna share it with everyone, and then shit happens. But yeah, I mean, those are all
so
speaking of which, so in Australia, social media would easily be the main cause for panic buying, right? So whether they saw examples of it elsewhere or between themselves, they're sharing how many toilet rolls they've got saved at home.
I just don't understand the toilet rolls.
It's promoted panic buying, which is, you know, you look deeper into it, there's the last thing you really need a lot of.
I know. But my question is, how come every single person I speak to shares the exact same view that why are people buying toilet rolls? And yet,
well,
I've never met someone who's stocked up on toilet rolls.
Yeah, well, it's hurt. Well, this is what I'm saying. This is that what Anja was talking about, how taking responsibility for what you're passing on, because the way that that's actually been spread using platforms, whether it's, I mean, they're all under Facebook's umbrella now, so WhatsApp or whatever else, it's a chain mail message, you know, and it's, I wrote a comment actually last week or the week before about, because I'm tied to Iran from my family, I know that, for instance, the Iranian government, they code the WhatsApp messages that as a chain mail, so that they can actually gain access to all the systems that pick up that message. And every phone, every device is essentially there's a gateway. So the message is filled with the essentially hidden code that allows them to then access that phone and tap it and surveil. So like, again, so that's probably one example of it being used maliciously. You know, this idea of toilet rolls, that being a message just gets sent around. You don't know where that's come from. And it very easily could have come out of an intelligence farm somewhere in Eastern Europe or somewhere in the Caribbean or wherever they want to base themselves, and use that as a methods and means. So yeah, cybersecurity is a huge thing. Yeah. And part of that is, for lawyers, at least in COVID, is just, you know, leave it to the experts. And so there's a balance there, because as lawyers, we're risk averse. So we could really panic about not knowing these things and not want to take any steps with technology. Yeah, but some of it's also being quite tempered and balanced and understanding that, for instance, if Zoom has created a platform, they are using industry standard secure channels. Some are and some not. So you use the ones that you know are perhaps encrypted end to end or secured a certain way at a certain industry level, because the reality is that, and that's something that everyone needs to sort of understand, and it's not a popular thought or opinion, but I'll give it, is that if someone really wants to penetrate, they will come for you. No one, except for the very expert, there are very few of those in the world that are actually ready to respond to an actual malicious attack that's very directed. But most of the exploits that happen are actually just due to people's, you know, lack of education in terms of making the right choice, not clicking a link, etc., etc. So most occur like that. And yeah, so the reality is there could be a panic about security, as you raised, but the reality is a lot of tech companies, because they're tech companies and they're not a law company, they are specialized in understanding. They're secure by design. You know, they have a whole understanding of cybersecurity and making sure that whatever they provide as a base service is secure. But yeah, look, there's, again, part of it is also then someone like ourselves, or for me, in my example, is knowing these things, being able to walk someone who isn't aware of these things through it as we start to implement those technologies.
So things like client lawyer privilege, and legal firms usually have so much sensitive information about whether it's their client is a company or a person. So it's not a blanket
response in that's a perfect use case scenario. So client professional or legal professional privilege is you know, it's not as blanket as, well, we can't use any portal because it's not safe. Sometimes it's a combination. So it's a combination of, well, we won't send you stuff in writing to your email address necessarily, but you can join our portal, which we know is secure. And then we give you perhaps the responsibility to maintain your passwords, or, you know, like, it's just a bit of thinking, just a bit of systems thinking and design to understand that, what does that interaction actually occur? How can we do it in the safest way possible? Because we're not here to build perfect systems. We are all anyway happy to have this conversation on Zoom. So we all know we're susceptible at the end of the day. So we need to temper that. I think that's also important to say, that not to freak out.
You said
This was tremendous. I want to give everybody the opportunity to just deliver some final thoughts, particularly when it comes to next steps. For anyone who is listening and following this, and they want to know, okay, you all have raised some things that I need to address right now. I want answers, where to go, what to do at this particular point in time. So take it. Who wants to take it first? Anja, we haven't heard from you in a while.
So for me, only a few days ago, I launched a global legal COVID relief hotline for lawyers, essentially allowing as much time as I can give to people who would like just an initial consult to just look at either, I mean, the focus right now is communications, as we talked about earlier tonight or today, depending where you are in the world. So, you know, what remote working solution do you have? Or would you like to amend, or, you know, how does it fit into everything else you're doing? I envisage that conversation being as simple as, what could we use, to all the way to, well, how does this fit into everything else we do? Can we look at a broader trajectory of change in our business? But you know, also questions like cybersecurity will come up, and I'd be more than happy to either answer them directly or refer to other people who I'm aware who are also lawyers, but work specifically in cyber law and the risks. But yeah, so that's something that I've put together really quickly. I've left it open until the end of April, but it might extend. I'm not sure. But I really want people to realize that if they need the hand, that they can come and speak. You know,
and
the door is open.
And the links to what you're sharing will be put beneath our conversation when we post it.
Yeah.
We have something similar. I mean, we're all sparing ourselves for the end of April. We've been pretty much working on the virtual summit for over 6 months already. Been doing an extensive market research, and previously we normally heard answers like, yeah, but why do you really need to go virtual? You know, we want to see each other in person. We want to have this personal touch to it, and this is why we go to the summits nevertheless. And we were all like, wait, aren't you going to the summit because of the content? What is happening here? And we figured out that it's really about how we facilitate these conversations, how we do the editorial on one side, and with the virtual summits, it's all about how we actually present that user experience. So what's the experience that we are all aiming for? What do we want to achieve? Is it only the interviews that we are having? Or do we want to provide something that is going to be a very much hands-on experience? So somebody, for example, provides us with a legal solution, or let's say a technical solutions for lawyers, and they are having these demos, and we want to provide them with the possibility of presenting that solution on a virtual summit as well. So, well, now with having the COVID, it's obvious that we need to push forward. We need to push harder, and we really need to kind of see this becoming reality. So this is pretty much what we are preparing. We do have quite a lot of conference speakers already. My team that is joining the moot court once again in space law is now actually informing me that they will not be having oral examination and testimonials in person, but rather through a video conference. And they're having all these moot court preparations through a virtual call, like we are having it right now. And they're asking people to kind of help them out with what that experience looks like. So I'm definitely going to have an interview with them, just asking them, hey, so how's the preparation for the moot court? Can you provide any advice to all the rest of the teams? And I think that this is our strength. We each are working individually, and we are being part of this virtual experience all of a sudden, and each of us is going through different challenges and is finding its own new comfort zone. And it's really about finding those solutions and bringing people together, finding what answers they can provide, and how agile they are. So I'm looking forward to have that summit and bringing all together, having those pre-recorded views with us, and do something together in April.
Great. Margaret.
Yeah. So I think that in this era of COVID, we are all at different levels of, I would say, privilege. And I understand my privilege, having spent years developing a virtual business and virtual teams working all over the world and all of that. And I keep thinking about those in those other areas of the world that do not have our privilege, that all of us in this room, in this virtual conversation have. And it is that keeps me going with the initiatives that we are working on. How do we leverage technology, which keeps us connected in this time of suffering, to support our colleagues, whether in the legal industry or in any industry on the ground in areas that are less privileged. And for the last year or so, since around March last year, so it's about March, April last year, that we've been working on the Future Law Institute and the Future Law Collaborative, bringing lawyers together in a virtual organization, which would be decentralized, where we've been exploring and working with ways in which lawyers can retain their autonomy, and yet we can find ways in which we can work on collective endeavors. Like Kudos would have pointed out earlier, look, isn't this an opportunity with the force majeure clause for us to work collectively on some stuff? So first, to the lawyers, I would say, one, we do have a collaborative that has already been working on several issues. We've identified some issues that we can work transnationally on within the context of Agenda 2030. And so we will share the links underneath if you want to become a part of this virtual Future Law Collaborative, and really provide leadership within your particular area of the law as well, and build a community around that within the collaborative, where you can start, serving others in other jurisdictions with the expertise that you have, and also in your own jurisdiction, assess what is the impact of COVID in your particular area of the law, and how can you support others. We have that. So hopefully we'll have the links below in this discussion when it's posted. We also have been planning, as Anja said, the first Future Law Virtual Summit, where we have already over 50 plus speakers. We actually, it was going to be right now. This is exactly the date that the Future Law Virtual Summit was going to happen. But with disruptions that have taken place, including most recently COVID, we thought, and we saw the rapid changes, it's a lot of volatility right now. We said, why not take the opportunity to reflect a little more about how we see the world changing in the context of COVID, and go back to our confirmed experts, and have the conversations now that we will have at the Future Law Virtual Summit informed by this COVID era. So, if you want to get involved, you want to be part of that summit because you think you have a legal solution for legal practitioners that could help with the process and practice of the law right now, there'll be links there for you to contact us, and we'd love to be able to profile your solution at the summit. If you're a lawyer that you really want to see what is at the cutting edge of technology and what can you learn and how can you transform your organization to a more virtual friendly organization, we will have the links. Sign up, come to the Future Law Virtual Summit. which we have not set the new dates. But if you sign up now, you will be the first to know when it will be. We think it's going to be the end of April, depending on how quickly our confirmed speakers can get up to speed and really want to, do it with a more COVID focus. But it's really an exciting time. It's a challenging time, but it is an exciting time, heavy with opportunity, particularly for lawyers who understand the relationship between law and the impacts in society. So we invite you to come and, be a part of what we're doing.
The world is changing, and the three of you are right on the crest of where things are going. So I invite everyone who's been listening to check out the links and to sign up as well. If you sign up, you're, like Margaret said, you're up to date with everything. You will be the first to know when the summit will be happening, and as well as future conversations like this, which will be taking place. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, for
a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Reining us
I learned
in.
so much. I learned so much.
We couldn't do it without you.
That was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me. It's just, it's so good to be around like-minded people, and often that's hard to find sometimes in the land that you live in.
Well, we found you, Curtis, and thank you for how
so.
incredible you are, and for your incredible mind, and for all that you're doing for the legal profession in providing that thought leadership. Your work is incredible.
And to answer I think perhaps the biggest cliffhanger question that was raised earlier, right at the beginning of this call, which is what is Margaret doing here?
I thought I answered that.
I think no. In the context of age, I think this is the point.
That.
This is the point. I think though, someone like me. Oh, look at
that. Hi.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
That is
We're just wrapping up. Give me a
moment. We're wrapping up now.
We're wrapping up, but this is all good. This is human life. Huh?
This is the new normal now.
And this is the new normal. And going on a virtual platform, it also means that people's family life, people's humanity, which they kind of leave at the door when they enter an office of a corporate building.
Let the baby stay on your lap.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, it's what was that?
But the point was
that viral thing with the guy doing the interview.
Yeah.
But Curtis was saying something.
The point was this, it is in the law we have unfortunate some systemic challenges, and one of them is an issue with age and experience. And the world we're entering into now is sort of flipped that on its head, in the sense that people such as myself are born into the world and see these things as second nature, and therefore have these ideas about putting these things together. So that's how important it is for people like Margaret, who have had an extensive career already and have still decided to have an entrepreneurial spirit and have decided to pivot and shift, recognize that in people who are perhaps in a traditional sense ignored when it comes to making big decisions. So I think I just wanted to share that, because that is a huge part of why it's so important that people like Margaret are advocating for supporting and sustaining younger people who perhaps, due to the lack of that history and that pedigree, are not being part of the conversation. That diversity is needed. And so Margaret, thank you so much. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for giving space to people like myself. And
well, thank you for existing, all you young people, because it's true. My colleagues and those senior to me look at me as if I'm crazy. What are you doing? But not anymore. I'm getting little messages now. Margaret, what tools should I use if I want to, have secure messaging with my clients? What should I implement? I'm getting it now from my colleagues. But a few years ago, they were like, why do you have a virtual offer? And thank you to Anja, without whose energy and brilliance we could not have formed the Future Law Institute. And it's been one of the best experiences of my life working with you, my darling. So It's been great and excited about what we could do together.
Amazing woman.
It's a collaboration of all of us. We formed the entities together.
Yeah. Love you all.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Be safe.
And be safe.
Yes, be safe.
Wash your hands.
Physical distancing, not social distancing. We're still being social.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without being
Bye-bye.
physical.
Oh,
Bye.
so cute. Bye.